The Arizona sun showed no mercy, beating down on the outlaw camp as if trying to bake the very sin from the dust. Two figures sat chained to an iron wagon wheel, bound not only by the length of rusted metal between them, but by a silence thick with desperation. He was a boy playing at being a man, his soft hands raw, and his face a mask of sunburnt fear. She was a woman carved from the territory itself, her eyes holding the glint of a hawk and the grit of the canyons. He called himself Clay, a name as common as the dirt beneath them. But every time the outlaw leader Silas Kane drew near, the boy's blood would run cold, for he was hiding a secret far heavier than his chains. He was Nathaniel Beaumont, and his father the governor had just signed this very land over to the railroad, unknowingly sealing his only son's death warrant. The first thing Nathaniel Beaumont learned about the woman chained to his wrist was that she did not waste motion. While he shifted constantly, the coarse iron cuff chafing his skin raw, she remained unnervingly still. She sat with her back against the splintered wood of the wagon wheel, knees drawn up, her gaze sweeping the camp with a slow, methodical rhythm. She catalogued every man, every rifle, every nervous twitch of the horses tethered at the edge of the box canyon. He had been Clay for 3 months now, a name he'd picked from a gravestone on his fool's errand out of Prescott. He had wanted to escape the suffocating velvet prison of his father's mansion, to prove he was more than just Governor Alistair Beaumont's heir. He'd wanted grit and authenticity. Now authenticity was the coppery taste of blood in his mouth, and grit was the sand grinding between his teeth. His capture had been ignominiously simple. He'd been swindled in a poker game in a dusty saloon in the town of Redemption. When he couldn't pay his fine leather boots, and the silver-inlaid colt that had been a birthday gift from his father marked him as a man of means, the swindlers sold him to the highest bidder, Silas Kane's gang, who were always in the market for ransomable hostages. The woman had been here first. They'd chained him to her without a word, the blacksmith's hammer blows echoing the pounding in his skull. "Don't pull," she said, her voice a low rasp, like stones scraping together. It was the first thing she'd ever said to him. He'd been trying to find a more comfortable position, yanking the chain taut. He froze. "Sorry." She didn't acknowledge the apology. Her eyes, a startling shade of hazel flecked with gold, remained fixed on the camp. A dozen men milled about, a motley collection of hard cases and desperate souls, all orbiting their brutal son, Silas Kane. Kane was a tall, gaunt man, with a face like a dried-up riverbed, and eyes that held a perpetual chilling amusement. He carried himself with the languid grace of a predator that knows it has no rivals. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked, his voice cracking from thirst. She turned her head, slowly appraising him. He saw the faint lines of sun and hardship around her eyes, the proud set of her jaw. She looked to be in her mid-20s, a few years older than his own, 21. "They call me Rosa," she said, then turned away, the conversation clearly over. Days bled into a miserable routine. Twice a day, a surly outlaw named Pete would bring them a bucket of brackish water and a tin plate of beans and hardtack. The nights were the worst. The desert cold seeped into their bones, and the firelight cast long dancing shadows that played tricks on the mind. Nathaniel would lie awake, listening to the drunken laughter of the outlaws, the mournful howl of a distant coyote, and the soft, steady breathing of the woman beside him. He was terrified, a deep primal fear that left him hollow. He was certain he would die here, an anonymous drifter named Clay, his bones bleached white under the Arizona sun. One evening, Silas Kane himself sauntered over. His boots made no sound in the thick dust. He stopped before them, a plate of stew in his hand, the savory scent of beef and onions a form of torture. Enjoying the governor's hospitality, Kane asked, his voice deceptively soft. He wasn't addressing them, but the men around the fire. A few chuckled. Nathaniel's heart hammered against his ribs. It had to be a coincidence, a common term. Kane took a slow bite of stew, chewing thoughtfully as he stared at Nathaniel. I hear Governor Beaumont is a man of progress, a man of vision. Pushing the railroad through signing land grants, taming the wild. All for the good of the people, they say. He knelt, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Nathaniel's. The man smelled of whiskey and gun oil. What do you think? Clay. You look like you might have an opinion. You got soft hands. Not the hands of a man who works the land. Nathaniel couldn't speak. His throat was a knot of terror. He could only stare back, trying to school his features into a blank mask of ignorance. Kane's eyes flickered to Rosa. And you little bird. Still silent. You were full of fire when my boys found you snooping around the old quarry. What were you after, I wonder? Rosa met his gaze without flinching. Justice. The word hung in the air sharp and clean. Kane's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. He chuckled a dry, rattling sound. Justice, he repeated, as if tasting a foreign delicacy. Justice is a commodity, my dear. And in this part of the world I set the price. He stood and tossed the rest of his stew into the dirt at their feet. Sleep well. Big things are coming, the kind of things that get noticed all the way in Prescott. As Kane walked away, Nathaniel finally let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His entire body trembled. He glanced at Rosa. In the dim firelight, he saw a new expression on her face. Not fear, but a cold, calculating fury. He knows Nathaniel whispered the words meant only for himself. He knows something's not right about you. Rosa corrected her voice, low and urgent. But he doesn't know what. Not yet. The minute he does, your value changes. You go from a random hostage to a tool, a weapon. And weapons get used until they break. She tested the chain, connecting them, her fingers probing the links. So you better hope he stays ignorant. Because whatever secret you're carrying, boy, it's chained to me too. The days that followed were a crucible of heat and tension. Nathaniel, or Clay, as he forced himself to be learned to live with the constant gnawing fear. He watched Silas Kane with a hawk's intensity, trying to decipher the man's intentions. Kane seemed to have forgotten them, turning his attention to planning something big. Riders came and went from the camp at all hours, their horses lathered their faces grim. There was talk of a payroll, a train, and the new rail line being built through the Dragoon Mountains. Chained together privacy was a forgotten luxury. Nathaniel and Rosa developed a clipped functional language. Water. Shift left. Watch Pete. There was no room for pleasantries. Yet in the shared misery, a strange sort of intimacy began to form. He learned the rhythm of her breathing as she slept. He saw the way she tracked the sun's movement across the canyon wall, her mind always working, always calculating. He in turn felt her studying him. One sweltering afternoon, as they huddled in the sliver of shade offered by the wagon, she spoke. You've never been hungry a day in your life, have you? It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Nathaniel thought of the lavish dinners in the governor's mansion, of plates sent back half-eaten. No, he admitted, his voice hoarse. It shows, she said. You're scared of the hunger, scared of the dirt. But you should be scared of the men. Hunger and dirt are honest. They'll kill you slowly. A man like Pete will do it quick for looking at him wrong. You're not scared, he observed. Rosa laughed, a short, bitter sound. Everyone's scared. The trick is to be scarier than whatever's coming for you, or at least be smart enough to be somewhere else when it arrives. Is that what you were doing at the quarry, being somewhere else? Her face hardened slightly. I was working. I'm a bounty hunter. Or I was. I was tracking a man named Finn Keynes, second in command. He killed a prospector and his family for their claim. The bounty was $500. Nathaniel was stunned. This woman, this captive, hunted men like these for a living. It explained the watchfulness, the lack of wasted movement. She wasn't a victim. She was a professional whose luck had run out. So you weren't just a random traveler, he murmured. Few people are out here, she replied, her gaze distant. Everyone's running from something, or running towards something, usually both at the same time. She looked at him pointedly. What are you running from, Clay? The question hit him like a physical blow. He was running from a name, from a future that felt like a gilded cage. He was running from the shadow of his father, a man he both admired and resented. A man whose public triumphs felt like private failures to his son. A life that wasn't mine, he answered the most honest thing he'd said in months. Rosa seemed to accept this. She didn't press further. A sliver of understanding, perhaps even respect, passed between them. The next day, the camp's simmering violence boiled over. Two of the outlaws, drunk on cheap tequila, got into a knife fight over a card game. It was a whirlwind of clumsy, brutal motion. One man, a lanky youth with desperation in his eyes, went down with a gurgling cry, clutching a wound in his belly. The other stood over him, panting, the bloody knife in his hand. Silas Kane emerged from his tent. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked to the victor, who was now looking around with dawning horror. "You've ruined a perfectly good pack mule," Jimmy Kane said, conversationally. He then drew his pistol in a single fluid motion and shot the standing man in the chest. Jimmy crumpled to the ground without a sound. Kane holstered his weapon. "We are a business gentleman," he announced to the stunned camp, "and I will not have my assets damaging each other. Drag them out for the coyotes." Nathaniel felt sick, the meager beans in his stomach threatening to come up. He had seen death before, but it had been the sanitized death of old age or sickness within Prescott's clean walls. This was different. This was life treated as a disposable commodity. He looked at Rosa. Her face was pale, but her expression was grimly focused. She was watching Kane, but also watching the other men. She was watching Finn, the man she'd been hunting. He was the first to move, grabbing one of the bodies by the boots and starting to drag it out of the camp. He showed no emotion at all. That night, the mood in the camp was sour and quiet. The fire was smaller, the laughter gone. Nathaniel and Rosa sat in silence, the chain between them feeling colder, heavier. "He killed them both," Nathaniel whispered into the darkness. Just like that. "He wasn't killing men," Rosa whispered back, her voice tight. "He was making a point. The first man died because he was weak. The second died to prove that only Kane decides who lives and who dies in this camp. It was a performance." She shifted closer, the clink of the chain barely audible. "We need to get out of here, Clay. Soon. Whatever he's planning, we don't want to be around for it. His kind of performance always has a grand finale." For the first time, Nathaniel heard genuine urgency in her voice. It wasn't the stoic calm of a professional. It was the sharp edge of a survivor who recognized that the rules of the game had just irrevocably changed. And in that shared moment of dread, the space between them shrank. They were no longer just a man and a woman chained together. They were allies. A week later, a new captive arrived. He wasn't a drifter or a prospector. He was a portly man in a dusty but well-made suit, his face florid with panic. He was a merchant dragged from a stagecoach that Kane's men had ambushed in a nearby pass. They threw him on the ground near the wagon wheel, his soft hands already scraped raw from being pulled from the coach. Nathaniel's blood turned to ice. He knew the man. His name was William Abernathy, a textile merchant from Prescott, who supplied the finest fabrics and suits. He had been to the governor's mansion on at least half a dozen occasions for fittings. He had measured Nathaniel for his suits since he was a boy. Abernathy was weeping softly, a pathetic broken sound. Nathaniel turned his face away, pulling the brim of his dusty hat low, praying the dirt and grime and the scraggly beard he'd grown would be enough of a disguise. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was the end. He would be recognized, and his secret would be out. Rosa noticed his tension immediately. "What is it?" She breathed, her eyes narrowed on the new arrival. "I know him." Nathaniel whispered the words, catching in his throat. "He knows my family." Rosa's expression became a mask of stone. She understood instantly. The delicate balance of their survival was about to shatter. Her gaze darted from Nathaniel to Abernathy, then to Silas Kane, who was watching the merchant with a cat-like curiosity. For 2 days, Abernathy was left to wallow in his own terror. He was not chained, but 2 guards watched him constantly. He was a different class of captive, and Kane was clearly deciding what to do with him. During this time, Nathaniel lived in a state of suspended agony. He barely ate or slept. Every time Abernathy looked in his direction, he would flinch. Convinced the man's eyes were clearing, that the dawning horror of recognition was about to appear on his face. On the 3rd evening, Kane pulled up a crate and sat across from Abernathy. The rest of the camp fell quiet, watching the drama unfold. "Mr. Abernathy." Kane began, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "I understand you do a great deal of business in Prescott. A pillar of the community, I'm told." "Please," Abernathy blubbered. "Take my money, my wagon. Whatever you want. I have a wife, children." Kane waved a dismissive hand. "Everyone has a wife and children. It's a dreadfully common affliction. I'm more interested in your clientele. You dress the important men." "Yes. The cattle barons, the mining tycoons, the politicians." Abernathy nodded numbly. "Yes, all of them." "Tell me about our esteemed governor," Kane said, leaning forward. "Alistair Beaumont. What kind of man is he, behind the speeches and the official portraits?" Nathaniel felt Rosa's hand brush his own, a small, steadying pressure. She was trying to tell him to remain calm, to not react. He focused on the feeling, the slight warmth of her skin, anchoring himself to it. Abernathy, desperate to please, began to talk. "He is a great man, a visionary. He's bringing civilization to this territory. The railroad is his crowning achievement. He works tirelessly. A man of principle." Kane listened patiently, a faint, sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Principle," he mused. "That's a fine word. Does his principle extend to his family? I hear he has a son, a single heir to the Beaumont legacy." Abernathy's eyes lit up, eager to provide more information. "Oh yes, young Master Nathaniel. A fine boy, though a bit spirited. Headstrong, always off on some adventure. The governor worries about him constantly, I can tell you. Says the boy has a poet's heart in a world that requires a conqueror's." "Nathaniel," Kane said, rolling the name around on his tongue. He glanced over at the wagon wheel, his gaze passing over Nathaniel without a flicker of recognition, but the look was chilling all the same. "And what does this poetic young man look like?" "Oh, tall like his father. Dark hair, and his eyes. He has his mother's eyes, a very distinct shade of blue, almost grey. A handsome lad. A bit slight of build, perhaps. Been away from Prescott for a few months now, the society pages say. Off seeing the world." Abernathy finished looking hopefully at Kane, as if he'd passed a test. Kane stood up, his smile gone. "You've been very helpful, Mr. Abernathy. He turned to his men. "He's of no further use. Take his watch and boots and let him walk back to redemption." Abernathy sobbed with relief, thanking Cain profusely, as two outlaws hauled him to his feet and stripped him of his valuables before shoving him out of the camp into the darkness. The moment was over. The immediate danger had passed. Nathaniel felt a wave of dizzying relief wash over him, so potent it almost made him sick. He hadn't been recognized. But as he looked at Silas Cain, who was now staring into the fire with a deeply unsettling, thoughtful expression, a new and more profound terror took root. Cain's interest in the governor wasn't random. It was personal. The questions, the tone, the way he'd savored the name Nathaniel, it was all part of something much darker. Later that night, as the camp slept, Rosa shifted beside him. Grey-blue eyes. She whispered so softly he barely heard. He didn't need to look at her. He could feel her gaze on him in the darkness. He had avoided her eyes for days, keeping his head down, his hat low. Now there was nowhere left to hide. Slowly he lifted his head and met her gaze. In the faint moonlight, his eyes, the eyes his mother had given him, were clearly visible. They were the color of a stormy sky over the plains, the color of ash and water. Rosa let out a long, slow breath. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. "Your secret is safe with me, governor's son." She murmured the words, a strange mix of threat and promise. "But it's not Silas Cain you need to worry about recognizing you. You need to worry about why he's so interested in your father in the first place. That's the real danger. That's the thing that's going to get us both killed." The revelation hung between them, a fragile and dangerous new bond. Rosa now knew his true identity, but instead of using it against him, she became his protector. She positioned herself to better shield him from view, subtly coached him on how to act, how to dirty his speech with the slang of a drifter, how to walk with a less refined gait. She was teaching him how to become clay, not just for survival, but for her own sake as well. Their fates were for now inextricably linked by the 16 inches of chain between them. Nathaniel in turn found a new resolve. The terror was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was now overlaid with a fierce determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for Rosa, the bounty hunter who had seen him at his weakest and hadn't sold him out. He began to observe the camp not as a terrified captive, but as a student of his enemy. He listened to the gossip, noting the grievances and loyalties among Cain's men. He saw that Finn, the man Rosa had been hunting, was ruthlessly efficient, but disliked by many of the others for his cold demeanor. He noted the guard rotations, the time it took for the water barrels to be refilled, the way the horses got spooked by storms brewing in the mountains. He was using the analytical mind his father had tried to shape for politics, applying it now to the problem of escape. Their moment of crisis, the event that forged their fragile alliance into true trust, came not from a bullet, but from a snake. It was late afternoon, the sun a merciless hammer. A large rattlesnake, seeking the shade beneath the wagon, slithered silently toward them. It coiled less than 2 feet from Rosa's outstretched leg, its tail giving a single dry buzz of warning. The camp was drowsy, most of the men seeking shelter from the heat. The guards were half asleep. No one saw. Rosa froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. Her eyes were locked on the snake. Nathaniel felt his own blood run cold. Any sudden movement, any pull on the chain, would be a death sentence for her. His mind raced his privileged education, suddenly providing an unlikely weapon. He remembered a lecture from a visiting naturalist at the university in Prescott. He'd talked about the unique fauna of the Arizona territory. He'd mentioned that certain species of rattlesnake were particularly agitated, by low, sustained vibrations and high-pitched noises. Nathaniel's eyes darted around. He saw Pete's tin cup left on a nearby crate. He couldn't reach it. But beside him, half buried in the dust, was a small, flat rock. "Don't move," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't even breathe." Slowly, painstakingly, he began to hum. It was a low, monotonous note, a sound he prayed would travel through the ground. The snake's head twitched, its tongue flickered. It was working. It was confused by the vibration. Next, he needed a high-pitched sound. He took a deep breath. He had never been a good whistler, but he tried now, forcing the air through his dry, cracked lips. A thin, piercing whistle cut through the still air. The snake, agitated by the combination of the hum and the whistle, uncoiled with angry speed. But instead of striking at Rosa, it turned and slithered rapidly away, disappearing into the rocky scrub at the edge of the canyon. Rosa let out a ragged gasp, her body slumping in relief. She looked at him, her hazel eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and something else, respect. "How did you know to do that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I read it in a book," he said, the answer sounding absurd even to him. She stared at him for a long moment, and then for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it transformed her face. "A book," she repeated softly. "Well, I'll be damned." That night the conversation was different. The barrier of secrets and suspicion had been breached. "We can't just run," she said, her voice a low murmur against the night sounds. "They'd track us down in a day. We need a plan. We need a diversion." "The horses," Nathaniel said immediately. "They keep the best mounts, the ones they used on the stagecoach raid, in that small corral on the east side. There's only ever one guard there, and he's old." "His name is Jebediah." Rosa nodded. "He sleeps most of his shift. But getting to him is the problem. And we'll still need to break this chain." Finn, Nathaniel said, thinking of the cold-eyed lieutenant. "He inspects the locks and chains himself every other night. I've watched him. He has the keys on a ring on his belt. He's meticulous. He'll be doing it tomorrow evening." A plan began to form in the space between them, a desperate scheme woven from his observations and her practical knowledge. It was a long shot, a fool's hope, but it was better than waiting for Kane's grand finale. "When Finn comes," Rosa whispered, her voice hardening with purpose, "you're going to have to create a distraction. Something he won't expect from you. You'll have to get him close. And what will you be doing?" She held up her hands, showing him her calloused, capable fingers. "I'm going to pick his pocket." He looked at her, then at the chain that bound them. It was no longer just a symbol of their captivity. It was the physical representation of their shared fate. If one failed, the other would fall. He felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since he left Prescott. Not fear, but a sharp, exhilarating sense of purpose. He was no longer just the governor's son, waiting to be rescued or executed. He was Clay, and he and Rosa were going to fight their way out. The next evening the sky bruised purple and orange as the sun dipped below the canyon rim. The air grew still pregnant with tension. Nathaniel's every nerve was alight. He and Rosa sat in their usual spot, feigning exhaustion, but their senses were stretched to the breaking point. They were waiting for Finn. As if on cue, the lieutenant appeared, the ring of keys jangling faintly at his hip. He moved with an unnerving confidence, his gaze sweeping over them with cold indifference. "On your feet," he ordered. They complied, the chain clanking. Finn began his inspection, starting with the thick iron bolt securing their chain to the wagon wheel. Nathaniel's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Finn could hear it. This was the moment. "It's a shame, isn't it?" Nathaniel said, his voice surprisingly steady. all this progress. The railroad, the telegraph. Soon there won't be any place left for men like you to hide." Finn paused his work, looking up at Nathaniel with a flicker of contemptuous surprise. The governor's little boy has an opinion. The words hit Nathaniel like a fist to the gut. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Finn knew. Abernathy must have spoken to someone else before being cast out, or perhaps Nathaniel's own slip of the tongue had been the final piece of the puzzle. Finn straightened up, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He ignored Rosa, completely focusing his attention on Nathaniel. Silas has been waiting for confirmation. He had a hunch from the moment he saw your soft hands. You carry yourself like you own the world, even in rags. He gestured with his head toward the main tent. "The boss wants to see you. Seems he has a personal message for your father." Fear, cold and absolute, washed over Nathaniel. The escape plan was dust. He looked at Rosa, a desperate, apologetic message in his eyes. Her face was a blank canvas, but he could see the fury simmering beneath the surface. Their chance was gone. Finn and another guard unbolted them from the wheel, but left the cuff connecting their wrists. They were shoved toward Silas Kane's tent. The flap was thrown open, and they were pushed inside. The tent was larger than the others, lit by a single, clean-burning lantern. A camp desk stood in the corner, covered in maps and papers. Silas Kane sat behind it, cleaning a revolver. He didn't look up as they entered. "Leave us," he said to the guards. The flap closed, plunging them into a suffocating intimacy. Kane finished polishing his gun, sighted down the barrel, and then finally placed it on the desk. He raised his eyes and looked at Nathaniel. It was a look of profound, ancient hatred. "Nathaniel Alastair Beaumont Tours," said his voice, quiet and resonant. "I've been looking forward to this conversation for 10 years. Nathaniel stood his ground. Rosa, a silent, tense presence at his side. "I don't know what you're talking about." Kane laughed, a chilling, humorless sound. "Don't you let me refresh your memory. Does the name Kane mean anything to you? Or perhaps the name of my family's ranch, the Circle K? It was nestled in the San Pedro Valley, greenest land you ever saw. Had water rights to the river going back to the Spanish grants. The San Pedro Valley." Nathaniel's mind flashed back. His father had talked about it. It was the site of his first great political victory as a territorial legislator, long before he was governor. The Beaumont Dam. The Beaumont Dam, Nathaniel, breathed the pieces, clicking into place with sickening clarity. Kane's eyes lit up with a feverish fire. Ah, he remembers. Your father, the visionary, decided that the valley's water was better used for the new copper mines and the town of Benson. He pushed a bill through the legislature that nullified all the old grants. He built his dam. He stood up and began to pace the tent, his movements agitated like a caged wolf. My father fought him. He argued in the courts, he pleaded in Prescott. But your father, with his smooth tongue and his powerful friends, called him an enemy of progress, an obstacle. When the dam was finished, our river, the river that had fed our land for 100 years, slowed to a trickle. The Circle K dried up. The cattle died. We lost everything. His voice dropped to a raw, painful whisper. My mother died of fever that winter. My father, he put a gun in his mouth the day the bank foreclosed. I was 15 years old. I buried them both myself in the dust that used to be our pasture. He stopped in front of Nathaniel, his face a mask of grief and rage. So you see, this isn't about ransom. It was never about money. This is about justice, the kind you can't get in a courtroom full of Alastair Beaumont's friends. What do you want? Nathaniel asked, his own voice hollow. I want your father to feel what I felt. Kane snarled. I want him to watch his future dry up and blow away. I sent him a message 2 days ago. It has a lock of your hair and a simple demand. He is to come to redemption. Alone. He will sign over the Territorial Water Rights Commission to my control. He will publicly declare the Beaumont Dam a failure and name it the Kane Memorial Folly. And he will do it in exchange for his son. He'll never do it, Nathaniel said. He'd be politically ruined. Oh, he'll do it, Kane said, with absolute certainty. But here's the beautiful part. I have no intention of returning you. Once he's done everything I ask, once he has destroyed his own legacy in front of the world, my men will deliver you back to him. In a pine box. He looked from Nathaniel to Rosa. The bounty hunter was a complication, but now she's a witness. She can tell the world what happened here. The sheer diabolical cruelty of the plan was breathtaking. It wasn't just murder. It was the complete and utter destruction of a man's life and soul. Silas Kane had spent a decade nursing his grudge, letting it fester and grow into this monstrous, intricate revenge. You're a monster, Rosa said, her voice dripping with contempt. Kane turned his cold eyes on her. I am what your governor made me, he said simply. He gestured to the tent flap. Chain them outside. Give them a good view of the trail leading out of the canyon. I want the boy to watch for his father's arrival. As they were dragged back into the cold night air, the weight of Kane's story settled over Nathaniel. This was no longer a matter of survival. It was a matter of legacy of blood, and of a hatred so deep it had poisoned the very earth of the San Pedro Valley. He was not a hostage. He was the final brutal act in a decade-long tragedy. Chained once more to the wagon wheel, the world had been stripped down to its most elemental truths. There would be no rescue. The governor would not ride in with the cavalry. Silas Kane's plan was a closed loop of despair, and they were trapped within it. The knowledge was both terrifying and strangely liberating. With nothing left to lose, there was nothing left to fear. He's insane, Nathaniel said, the words falling flat in the cold air. No, Rosa corrected, her voice a blade of ice. He's patient. It's worse. An insane man makes mistakes. Kane has been planning this for years. Every detail is accounted for. Except for you, Nathaniel countered, turning to her. He sees you as a witness, a loose end. He doesn't see you as a threat. A flicker of her old defiant fire returned to her eyes. Everyone makes mistakes. Their aborted escape plan was useless now. They were under constant watch, but their minds, sharpened by desperation, began to work again, not on a plan of escape, but one of survival, of disruption. They could not outrun Kane, but perhaps they could undo him from within. They spent the next day in watchful silence, a silence that was a conversation in itself. They noted the subtle shifts in the camp's atmosphere. Kane's obsession was making the other men nervous. They had signed on for profit, not to be foot soldiers in a madman's personal vendetta. The fault lines Nathaniel had observed before, the resentment toward Finn, the simple greed of men like Pete, were now gaping cracks. The key came in the form of Jebediah, the old one-eyed guard who watched the horses. He was a relic from a different era, a man who had outlived his time. He was often drunk, and in his drunkenness, he was sentimental. That evening, as Jebediah brought them their meager meal, Nathaniel decided to gamble. My father once told me that a man's character is revealed not by the battles he wins, but by the company he keeps. Nathaniel said, his voice loud enough for the old man to hear clearly. Jebediah paused, peering at him with his good eye. Your pa said that sounds like a smart man. He was, Nathaniel said. He also said, you can't trust a man who doesn't respect the past. A man like Kane. He wants to burn the whole world down to settle an old score. But what about the men who follow him? What's their share of the ashes? Jebediah grunted a non-committal sound, but he didn't move away. He lingered his gaze, drifting toward the fire, where Cain stood apart, staring out into the darkness, lost in his own hate. Rosa saw the opening. "That man you were tracking," she said softly to Nathaniel, but also for Jebediah's benefit. "Finn, the one who killed the prospector's family. The bounty was $500. That's more than most of these men will see in a year of robbing stages. And all that gold from the prospector's claim, I'd wager Finn didn't share it with anyone. It was a brilliant stroke. She was planting seeds of greed and mistrust, reminding them that while Cain was pursuing a ghost, his lieutenant was getting rich." Jebediah finally shuffled off, but the seeds had been planted. Throughout the next day, Nathaniel and Rosa fanned the flames with carefully chosen words, speaking to any outlaw who came near. They spoke of lost gold, of uneven shares of a leader, so lost in the past, he was leading them all to a hangman's noose. The disruption they'd hoped for came to a head on the third night after Cain's revelation. A rider arrived, exhausted, his horse nearly spent. He had come from the direction of redemption. He spoke urgently to Cain, and a murmur of excitement and dread rippled through the camp. The governor had been spotted. He was riding toward redemption alone, just as the message had demanded. The camp became a hive of activity. Cain was readying a small hand-picked group, including Finn, to ride out and meet him to spring the final part of his trap. The rest of the men were to stay behind and guard the camp. This was their chance. The camp was divided. Cain's attention was fixed on his revenge. As darkness fell, a fight broke out near the main fire. It was Pete, the surly guard, accusing another outlaw of holding out on a share from their last robbery. The accusation was a spark in a powder keg of simmering resentment. Shouts turned to shoves, and soon half the camp was embroiled in a chaotic brawl. In the confusion, Jebediah shuffled over to the wagon wheel. In his hand was a small, heavy file. He didn't look at them. "He's going to get us all killed," the old man mumbled, dropping the file on the ground between them. "A man ought to die for gold, not for some rich fellow's ghost." He turned and melted back into the shadows. Rosa snatched the file. Her hands, nimble and strong, went to work immediately on the link of the chain connecting their cuffs. The shriek of metal on metal was masked by the sounds of the fight. Nathaniel kept watch, his body tense, shielding her from view as best he could. The fight was escalating. A gunshot rang out. Men scattered, drawing their own weapons. Cain's voice roared over the chaos, trying to restore order, but the discipline he had maintained, through fear, was shattering. "It's done," Rosa hissed. The link gave way. They were free from each other, though the cuffs still dangled from their wrists. The horses, Nathaniel said. They moved in a low crouch, skirting the edge of the camp, using the shadows and the chaos as cover. The corral was unguarded. Jebediah had made sure of it. 2 fine horses taken from the stagecoach stood nervously. Saddling them was a frantic, fumbling affair in the dark. Just as Nathaniel was tightening the cinch on his saddle, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Finn. He had ignored the brawl, his cold eyes missing nothing. Going somewhere, Finn sneered, raising his pistol. Rosa moved like lightning. She'd palmed a rock from the ground, and she threw it with a bounty hunter's desperate accuracy. It caught Finn on the side of the head. He staggered, his shot going wide, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding them. The gunshot attracted attention. Shouts went up. "They're escaping." Nathaniel swung himself into the saddle, his heart in his throat. Rosa was already mounted, her reins tight in her hand. "Ride," she screamed. They dug their heels into the horses' flanks, bursting from the corral and out of the camp. They galloped into the darkness of the canyon, the sounds of shouting and more gunshots echoing behind them. They were out. but they were riding directly into the path of Silas Cain and toward a father who was walking into a trap meant to destroy them all. The escape was over. The race had just begun. The night was a blur of thundering hooves, whipping wind, and the desperate, ragged sound of their own breathing. They pushed the horses mercilessly, not daring to look back. The moon was a sliver, offering little light to navigate the treacherous, rock-strewn landscape. Rosa rode with an innate animal, Grace guiding her horse through the darkness as if she were born to it. Nathaniel followed her lead, his mind a maelstrom of fear and adrenaline. They were not just fleeing, they were racing toward a confrontation. They had to intercept Governor Beaumont before Cain did. "He'll be on the old trail to redemption," Rosa shouted over the wind. "It's the most direct route. Cain will expect him of there." "Then we can't take the trail," Nathaniel yelled back. "We have to cut across the mesas. It's rougher, but it might be faster if we don't break a leg." It was a gamble, a dangerous path through shattered rock and thorny scrub, but Rosa agreed without hesitation. She veered her horse off the worn path, and they plunged into the true, untamed wilderness. For hours they rode. The horses, strong and well-fed, performed magnificently, their hooves striking sparks from the flinty rock. Nathaniel's former life felt 1,000,000 miles away. The soft-handed boy who had left Prescott was gone, burned away by the desert sun and the heat of desperation. In his place was a man who felt the rhythm of the horse beneath him, whose eyes were scanning the terrain for danger, whose every thought was focused on the single vital goal of intercepting his father. Just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of grey and rose, they saw it, a lone rider on the trail below them, moving at a steady, determined pace. Even from a distance, Nathaniel recognized the proud, straight-backed posture. It was his father. At the same time, Rosa pointed to the north, a plume of dust, Cain and his men riding hard to spring their trap. "We're not going to make it in time," Rosa said, her voice grim. "They'll reach him before we can get down there." "Then we don't go down," Nathaniel said, his eyes scanning the narrow ridge they were on. It overlooked a tight bend in the trail where Cain would surely set his ambush. "We make our stand here." They dismounted their legs, trembling from the long ride. They had one weapon between them, the silver-inlaid Colt that Finn had, in his haste, failed to take from Nathaniel's saddlebag. It had 6 bullets. They took cover behind a jumble of boulders overlooking the trail. Below they could see Cain and his 5 riders concealing themselves, rifles ready. They were waiting. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Nathaniel's hand was slick with sweat as he gripped the Colt. He looked at Rosa. Her face was calm, her eyes focused. She gave him a short, sharp nod. "We're in this together." Then they heard the steady clop of a single horse. Governor Alistair Beaumont rode into view. He looked older than Nathaniel remembered his face, etched with worry, but he rode with an unyielding dignity. He was a father coming for his son, protocol, and politics be damned. Now Cain's voice boomed from the rocks below. His men stepped out, rifles leveled. Governor Beaumont reined in his horse, his face a mask of weary resignation. Cain the governor said, his voice carrying in the still morning air, "I am here. Let the boy go." "It's not that simple," Alistair Cain sneered, stepping into the open. "First you have some papers to sign, a public confession." From their perch above, Nathaniel raised the Colt. He was not a good shot. His father had insisted he learn, but he'd always hated the loud, violent finality of it. Now the lives of everyone he cared about depended on it. "Don't shoot Cain, Rosa," whispered urgently. "You'll never hit him from this distance. Shoot at the rocks above them. Cause a rock slide. Create chaos." It was a brilliant, desperate idea. Nathaniel took aim, not at a man, but at a section of loose scree on the cliff face, directly above Kane's men. He held his breath, squeezed the trigger. The shot was deafening in the silence. The bullet struck the cliff, and a shower of rock and dust cascaded down onto the outlaws. It wasn't a massive landslide, but it was enough. Horses shrieked and reared in terror. One of Kane's men was knocked from his feet. The ambush was thrown into complete disarray. What the hell? Kane roared, looking up. Nathaniel fired again, and again. He emptied the gun, not trying to hit anyone, but to sow panic. Below, Governor Beaumont seized the moment. He was not an unarmed politician. He was a man of the West. He spurred his horse forward, straight at the confused outlaws, drawing a pistol Nathaniel hadn't known he was carrying. Rosa, seeing her moment, began to scramble down the steep incline, moving with the speed and agility of a mountain cat. Nathaniel followed, sliding and stumbling, his hands torn on the sharp rocks. By the time they reached the trail, it was chaos. The governor had taken cover, exchanging fire with the outlaws. One of Kane's men was down. Finn was trying to rally the others. And then Nathaniel saw him. Silas Kane, his face a canvas of pure fury, was ignoring the governor. He was stalking toward Nathaniel, his eyes burning with a decade of hatred. His revenge had been spoiled, and he was going to claim his prize one way or another. "You!" Kane hissed, raising his pistol. Before he could fire, Rosa slammed into him from the side. She was unarmed, but she fought with a savage intensity, a whirlwind of fists and fury. Kane was stronger, and he threw her off, but it gave Nathaniel the second he needed. He didn't have a gun. He had only the heavy iron cuff still dangling from his wrist. As Kane turned back to him, Nathaniel swung the length of broken chain like a flail. The heavy metal caught Kane square in the jaw with a sickening crunch. Kane staggered back, stunned, his pistol falling from his grasp. He collapsed to his knees, his grand revenge shattered. The fight was over. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, and with the governor pressing his attack, lost their nerve and fled. Finn, ever the pragmatist, was the first to go. Silence descended on the trail, broken only by the panting of breath and the nervous stamping of the horses. Nathaniel stood over the dazed Silas Kane. His father was rushing toward him, his face a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming relief. "Nathaniel, my son, Alistair Beaumont," wrapped his arms around him. A hug Nathaniel hadn't realized he'd been starved for his entire life. When he pulled back, he looked at the dirt, the beard, the raw determination in his son's eyes. "You've changed." "I have," Nathaniel said, his voice steady. He looked past his father to Rosa, who was getting to her feet, bruised but resolute. "We both have." They left Silas Kane tied and waiting for the law. The ride back toward Prescott was quiet. The governor for the first time seemed at a loss for words. He had come to rescue his poetic, headstrong boy, and had found a man forged in the crucible of the outlaw camp. On a rise overlooking the town, they stopped. The world of politics, of society, of the Beaumont name lay below them. "You'll come home now," the governor said. It was not a command, but a hopeful question. Nathaniel looked at Rosa. He saw the open spaces in her eyes, the promise of a life lived on her own terms. He looked at his own torn and dirty clothes, at the scar on his wrist where the chain had been. Going back to being just Nathaniel Beaumont felt like putting on a suit that no longer fit. "My name is Nathaniel Beaumont," he said to his father, his voice clear and strong. "But I think I'm still figuring out who Clay is, and I need to do that out here." He turned to Rosa. "The bounty on Finn was $500. I'd say we've earned it, partners." Rosa looked at the governor, then back at Nathaniel. A real, genuine smile spread across her face. "Partners," she agreed. Governor Beaumont watched as his son and the bounty hunter turned their horses away from the city lights of Prescott and rode back out into the vast, unforgiving and beautiful landscape where they belonged. He had lost an heir, but he had found his son. And so the story of the governor's son comes to a close. It began with the clink of chains, a tale of two strangers bound by fate in a desolate canyon. But it ended not with a return to a gilded cage, but with the choice of a dusty trail. Nathaniel Beaumont shed his name to find himself, and in the heart of the unforgiving West, alongside a woman as tough as the territory itself, he was truly unchained. He learned that a name is just a word, but what you do, who you fight for, and the partnerships you forge in the fire, that is your true legacy. What do you think was Nathaniel's choice, an act of foolish rebellion or one of profound courage? Let me know in the comments below. These are the kinds of stories, the hidden histories of grit and transformation that we love to tell. If you are captivated by the journey of Clay and Rosa, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves the untamed spirit of the West, and be sure to subscribe for more tales from the forgotten corners of American history. Thank you for listening.